over 65 books to his credit, 19 of them New York Times bestsellers. His writings have traveled 35 languages and sold over 2 million copies. Yes, our guest on the show today is prolific indeed. That's why people call him, and I quote, one of the most lucid and inspirational philosophers of our times, a motivational speaker par excellence, and a preeminent leader of the body, mind and spirit movement. Please welcome Deepak Chopra, Dr. Deepak Chopra, and now a body, mind, spirit leader. Deepak ji, how did this transition happen?
It's a long story. I went to medical school here in Delhi at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Then I went to the United States immediately after I graduated. I did my training in medicine, internal medicine, endocrinology, and then neuroendocrinology, which is brain chemistry. And this was an exciting time for us in the US at that time, because for the first time we had the ability to measure brain chemicals. And there was a new technique developed by a woman called Rosalind Yallo, who won the Nobel Prize that time. We could be very certain that these chemicals that we were measuring, neuropeptides as we call them, neuro, they're in the brain, peptides, they're proteins, that they were the molecular substrates of emotion. For me, this was very interesting because I was always interested as a physician on why, if you had two patients who had the same illness, received the same treatment, got looked after by the same physician, they could have completely different outcomes. So there was something that we did not understand at that time. That's what got me interested in the connection between spirit, as you call it, or consciousness as we call it, same thing, how consciousness influences what's happening in the mind, in the brain, in the body, and ultimately as our experience of the world. So over 30 years, this has been amazing kind of development in the deeper understanding of this relationship. First of all, what's the origin of thought? Where does it come from? Two, that thought has neural representations. You can't have a thought without it being represented in the brain. And we can see that now through functional MRIs, whatever. If I ask you to imagine a sunset, I can see the exact place where your brain will light up. And then we also know what the molecules are and what's happening in the body. These chemicals influence everything from your cardiovascular functioning to inflammation to healing to immune responses, ultimately influence how you perceive the world. So that's how it got started, but it's gone a long, long way after that. There's a lot more. I could speak on this for a week and tell you that for the first time we might know, as we have never known before, that consciousness may be more fundamental than as an activity of our brain. It may be fundamental to the universe, which is something that Vedic rishis had talked about.
In every object, in everything, animate or inanimate?
Animate or inanimate, in the whole universe, in space-time geometry.
You know, for us in this avatar, in this human form, when we see something physically wrong, whether it's a cracked mug or whether it's our cracked bodies, we say we can work on them and heal them. And now this whole discovery or this understanding that consciousness actually is the biggest healing source. But how does one work on consciousness? Because we really can't see it and we are limited by the resources at our disposal.
Well, if you read, say, something like the Yoga Vasishtha or even various parts of the Bhagavad Gita or any of the Upanishads, but particularly, you know, some of the more esoteric, relatively esoteric texts, the way consciousness is defined is consciousness can't be seen, but without which there is no seeing. You can't taste it or smell it or touch it or perceive it, but there's no smelling, touching, perceiving without consciousness. So it's the fundamental activity that gives rise to perceptual experience. It's very important to understand that our perceptual, so if you look at those flowers, for example, or these flowers, that's a perceptual experience. And that's a perceptual experience that is totally dependent on a human brain right now, because the human brain responds to certain wavelengths of light that make me see red or yellow. If a honeybee was looking at that, it wouldn't have the same experience, because a honeybee's eye cells respond to ultraviolet. We don't know what that experience would be. A chameleon's eyeballs swivel on two different axes. You can't even remotely imagine what that looks like to a chameleon. An owl, a bat, they're all living species. So what we call perception is a brain-dependent, species-dependent, and often culture and mythology-dependent experience. It has nothing to do with fundamental reality. That's why we call it Maya. See, the Maya is actually the perception of an object which exists as an experience in consciousness. So perceptual reality is species dependent, brain dependent, but what's creating that perceptual experience? It's a fundamental activity called consciousness, which then differentiates into these different perceptual objects, different perceivers, and different modes of perception. If you go deep again in Vedanta, you'll hear these three as Rishi, Devata, Chandas. So Rishi is the seer, Devata is the process through which the seeing comes about, Devata, because it's the process through which the seeing comes about, and Chandas is the object which is also contained in the perceiver. Every perceived object is a reflection of a perceiving brain. Even the brain as a perceived object is a reflection of other brains perceiving it. And all these perceptual objects have as one fundamental ground consciousness, without which there would be no perception. Just like electricity right now could be that light bulb, could be my phone, could be the television set that people are watching us on, or could be the radio that they're listening to us. These are perceptual experiences based on a fundamental activity of the universe called electricity or electromagnetism. But beyond electromagnetism, because even electromagnetism at some level is a perceptual experience, right? Feel it.
True.
Shock or whatever. So beyond all perceptual experiences is something very fundamental. Vedanta, Brahman. And the universe is Brahman, it's the perceptual object. It's very difficult for people to get this. But, and they say, oh, spirituality, how you define it, it's so vague, it's so metaphysical. It's not actually. Because a simple way to define spirituality is self-awareness, period. If you're not aware about your own mind, your own body, your own perceptual processes, your own cognitive processes, how are you going to be aware of what's happening outside? So, because everything that's happening outside is a reflection. So, everything that we call wrong with the world right now, whether it's eco-destruction or global warming or war or terrorism, is because we've mistaken the perceptual for the fundamental.
And I think that's the root cause of all the problems.
Every problem in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, Krishnamurti used to say the highest form of human intelligence is the ability to observe yourself without judging yourself. Because in the mere witnessing of your own aspects of your own being, thoughts, feelings, emotions, desires, memories, mind, body, the world, is a transformation, radical transformation. It was such a simple statement with such profound implications. But he used to also say, by the way, the observer is the observed, which nobody got it in those days when he used to talk about the observer being the observed. Fundamental reality, they're all perceptual experiences within the one consciousness.
It's like two parallel mirrors, right?
Yes.
Image and
yeah.
image and image.
Like that's right.
Beautiful. So Deepak ji, now wanting to bring you back to, say, real world connect of all of us saying, okay, so we want to work on our consciousness. Can we do it in our daily life as a practice?
Traditionally, it was Raj Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga and Gyan Yoga. Very fundamental forms of yoga. Raj Yoga is reflective self-inquiry, contemplation, meditation.
Right.
All the different, 8 limbs of yoga as described by Patanjali, yamas, niyamas, etc., subject to new interpretations because they're couched in ancient terms. But still, Raj Yoga is all the disciplines of yoga. Bhakti Yoga is the experience not only of devotion, but I think all relationship, a deeper understanding of relationship in forms of love and empathy, compassion. I think they're all expressions of Bhakti Yoga. Gyan Yoga is trying to figure it out, which is the most difficult.
The questioning?
The questioning.
Okay.
And reflection more than anything else. And all science is based on that, basically. All science is Gyan Yoga. It is through science we're beginning to understand consciousness now. So I would say science is a form of Gyan Yoga, and then ultimately Karma Yoga, which is action. But action which is more in congruence with the forces and elements of the universe in evolution, which was called dharma in a sense, but in a deeper sense, it's just that the elements and forces in the microcosm are aligned with the elements and forces of the macrocosm. So dharma is much more deeper understanding of the relationship between microcosm and macrocosm. It can start very simply. I think one can start very simply by spending some time doing nothing and just being. If you just do nothing, sit quietly, then things come to you. Revelations, in fact, insights don't come through concentration, they come through allowing them to come through. If consciousness is our fundamental activity, it's constantly surfacing in our mind as our own insights, intuition, creativity, imagination, sensations, images, thoughts, feelings. These come spontaneously. Then we don't try and kind of control them. They're aspects of our being. The problem is we get so hypnotized by the hypnosis, literally, of social conditioning, that nobody then thinks for themselves, nobody reflects. Everybody becomes a bundle of conditioned reflexes that are constantly being triggered by people and circumstance. I was watching the news the other day, and the front page is murders and social unrest and conflict and stampedes, and you realize nothing changes in the long run, or if it does, it takes such a long time, because it becomes a feedback loop. We see what's there, we think it's normal, then we conform to it, and it just keeps reinforcing itself. It's not here, it's everywhere.
And I think somewhere that's the paradox, because I think social conditioning and social happenings are so many that the you gets absolutely lost, if not negated. And on the other side, there is this fear that if I'm alone, if I have nothing to occupy me, I'm going to get lost.
All of that is the conditioned mind, though. All of it, okay? And it goes very deeply, because first of all, it's social conditioning, but then it's historical conditioning, it's economic conditioning, it's cultural conditioning, it's the history of the country, it's the history of conflicts in the past. We don't realize how deep it is, but even watching the social dramas, whether it's on soap operas or movies or in real life, it's no different from the stories in the Mahabharata. There's betrayal, there's intrigue, there's polygamy, there's deceit, there's murder, and there's the occasional hero in the end with his or her dharma. But we're repeating the same cycles all the time. Nobody escapes it unless they take a minute and say, what's going on? And very few do that. It's a kind of a motley group of sages and psychotics and occasional geniuses, but nobody else questions it. When I was researching this book, Rumi has a very beautiful poem somewhere. He says, who am I in the middle of all this thought traffic? All this thought traffic, and there's somebody sitting there in the middle of it, totally lost, as you said.
Coming on to this book, God. Tell us about this book.
This book started, it came to me in a sense when I accidentally was given at one of my lectures an article that had appeared in the New York Times in 1930. It was a small article, and it was a meeting between Rabindranath Tagore, who was then in his early 70s or just about 70.
Okay.
And Einstein was 20 years younger. Einstein had, this is before the Second World War. In Germany, there was the zeitgeist of Nazism emerging. Einstein was thinking of leaving the country. He was already a world-famous celebrity, in a sense, celebrity scientist. And he actually invited Tagore to meet him in a place called Potsdam, which is outside of Berlin. And the meeting was recorded by a few reporters. But because there was so much else going on in the world, who was interested in a poet and a scientist talking? So that conversation was lost. But essentially, the conversation is very, very elegant conversation, because Einstein holds the view that the universe exists independently of you and me. He's famous for saying that the moon would still be there if we weren't looking at it. And Tagore makes the point that the moon you're looking at is a human moon. Through human consciousness and through a human nervous system. He says, and Einstein says, no, but there's a scientific view. And Tagore holds on and he says, the scientific view is the view of the scientific human being. Okay. So this immediately sparked in me this whole idea that, you know, consciousness is fundamental and perception is secondary, which is what we've been talking about, right? Species specific. So I went back, you know, you go back to the Old Testament, and Job is this poor guy who suffers because God is testing him. And God actually makes a wager with the devil, with Satan. Is he more faithful to you or to me? And they experiment with this poor guy who's really a self-righteous, you know, person. He's full of righteousness, and he says, why do good people suffer? We still ask that question. Okay, so why do good people suffer? And in India, we pass it off as karma. And then we can be happy, but we haven't answered the question. So I went from Job then to Socrates, who says, well, who's asking the question? Okay, if you don't know who's asking the question, how can you have an answer? So I went from there to St. Paul, who actually is more responsible for Christianity, and he is known for the expression born again, because he dies to his old self and he's renewed in his revelation. And so I tracked the history of literally revelation, in a sense divine revelation, but also its evolution. Because it starts with very fundamental questions which we are still asking, but as we move through these almost 2,500 years, I skipped Buddha because I'd already done a book on Buddha, but I went to Adi Shankara in the book. I went to a couple of very interesting Christian women saints who had been ignored as usual by the church, but who had deep insights. And then I finally ended up where I started with Tagore and Einstein. What it is a history of our understanding of consciousness, which is actually still expanding. But these people are all, in a sense, milestones along the way. So that's why it's called God, a History of Revelation. It's what is called historical fiction. I didn't do anything other than create the dialogue. Otherwise, it's all historical.
So during this journey of revelation, any insights?
The most important insight is that if we confuse reality with perception, and if then we see the world with a fragmented mind, and all problems come from the fragmented mind, which actually doesn't exist. It's a socially induced hallucination. And we can wax eloquent about the metaphysics of it, but what are the practical steps, as you said? And so I've kind of reframed them for myself. For me now, The practical steps include self-awareness as best understood in Vipassana. Just make it practical. Self-awareness, Vipassanas, and you can choose any one of them, or you can become an expert in all of them, which is awareness of your perceptual experience of the world, awareness of your body, awareness of the interior of our bodies, which is so well described in the yogic tradition, in the Gheranda Samhita, and all these beautiful texts that we have inherited. Awareness of your breath, awareness of your mental space, and awareness of relationships. So that's first thing.
Okay.
The second is self-reflection. Who am I? Who's asking the question, who am I? Sri Ramana Maharishi. You know, all these people have already given us the stepping stones. Also, you know, deeper questions. Why is there existence? Why does the universe exist? And how come I know that the universe exists? What is it that makes me aware that the universe exists? And the interesting thing about reflection is, and you know, that's how my books have come about. I do a little bit of research, obviously, and these days it's very easy because you go to the internet, you Google the information, and then you go to the libraries and you kind of are directed. But most of it is not research. You just ask questions. And you know, I've come to the conclusion that if you live the questions, the answers reveal themselves to you. So that's the second. The third is transcendence, for which there is no substitute, which is basically, you know, Dhyan Dharana Samadhi. The fourth is really deeply understanding the difference between the perceptual experience of the world and the fundamental, the difference between, you know, I was looking at the word Maya, and everybody says illusion, which is fine, but the word Maya goes back to the word matrika, or mata, or of course in English, in Latin, mater, mother, music, measurement, meter, how we measure, mythology, because what Maya is actually the measurement of the infinite which can't be measured. We measure the infinite, and we create a perceptual experience around it. So you know, this flower is actually rainbows and sunshine and earth and water and wind and air and the whole universe right there in the flower. But we say it's a flower actually. And this is the problem with medicine. When I started, we started to look at the body as a noun, as a structure, as a mug that you said, you know, so you fix it. But it's not. This is an activity of the universe. It's a very dynamic activity. Your body is made up of stardust, and it's recycling with the whole ecosystem. But as long as I don't understand it, I'll destroy those trees, which are my lungs. You know, I'll pollute the waters, which is my circulation, and desecrate the earth, which is my body. So that deeper understanding is very essential. And finally, I think conscious choice making. So these are very simple steps if we take them, but who's going to take them? It takes a while even to explain them. So I'm getting on in years. I'm in the autumn of my life now. I said, how can one, you know, the books are fine, but how can you actually maybe influence collective consciousness? Because lots of people are interested, a lot of people are also pursuing the same solutions in a fragmented manner. We have solution for poverty, solution for war, and end up being fragmented solutions. The solution for war is another war.
True.
So we call it a just war or whatever.
The solution comes up with its own problems, you know.
Problems. So the only way to do that is actually, I think, and this is, I'm sharing it with a lot of people who seem to agree that, you know, the social networks we have right now, they are actually becoming the neural networks of a global brain. And there's something evolving in the human species through technology. So I think technology is the next phase of our evolution, where we could democratize the process of creativity. You know, why outsource manufacturing? Why not outsource to everybody in the world creative solutions? and see how they come
together.
together. So I've been traveling recently. I went to England and I proposed this. I went to Holland and I got actually people from the government and the opposition, the coalition, and the crown prince and the businessmen to start recreating their whole economy and social systems based on what we call self-organizing dynamic networks of creative solutions.
So you think that actually we've been given another platform
We do.
for accessing it collectively?
I think so.
To that pool?
I think what technology is doing is creating a new identity. You know, again, I went to Tagore says so beautifully, he says, and it's kind of almost anathema to say this these days in the political environment, but he used to say that, and Krishnamurti used to say, nationalism is a disease. You know, Krishnamurti used to say nationalism is tribalism.
Creates boundaries.
Creates boundaries. And every boundary is conceptual in the end. Every boundary.
Yeah.
So what happened in Tunisia, what happened in Egypt, what's happening in Syria right now, or what happened in India, you see what's happening is a new conversation, a new identity that's breaking traditional strictures, traditional ways of looking at the world, traditional boundaries is already happening. And once these people start connecting, first of all, news is instantaneous. Secondly, it's very difficult to hide things. Everything is becoming transparent. So, you know, we now suddenly see in the US this huge kind of scandalous the scandalous events in the US Army, in the political systems, cronyism, corruption, influence peddling, bureaucracy. It's universal. It's everywhere. In some places it's more sophisticated. In some places it's more flagrant. But it's coming out. And then, you know, when people start to realize that there's nothing to hide, what are your spy systems going to do? You know everything about your enemy, and then you realize he or she is just like yourself.
You've just taken away the biggest weapon.
You've taken away. So this, I think this is evolution. And this is whether we participate or not, it's happening.
For the tipping point to happen, gathering a critical mass is critical, and that's what is happening, you know?
Correct.
Getting opinions together.
Yes. Critical mass, tipping point, whatever you want to call it, it's happening. It's when the caterpillar thinks the world is coming to an end, it turns into a butterfly.
So I like this, and I think this butterfly note is a good note I'm going to take a break on. After this, we're going to go back to the consciousness, Deepak ji, after the break, and talk about how do we see the consciousness evolving? How do you see India vis-a-vis the rest of the world? I know it's a little creating a little boundaries, but at least these are constructs that exist. And of course, your own personal journey. We'll talk about all that and a lot more after this break. Stay with us.
भारतीय बैडमिंटन को विश्व स्तर तक ले जाने में मैं एक जरिया बनी। आज दुनिया भर के खिलाड़ियों के लिए हम भी एक चुनौती हैं। इस पर मुझे गर्व है। भारत मेरी पहचान।
We are in conversation with Deepak Chopra, a name that really needs no introduction. Deepak ji, talking now of the consciousness. Earlier in the program, we spoke about how I think one of the first steps is to become the observer. I want to take a real life scenario with you. I think irritation, anger, frustration, it crops up in all our lives in some form or the other. And you're well known for saying, you don't get angry, you don't get irritated. So just take us through the process as how does one start observing oneself to bide over that time?
There are simplistic and simple ways of doing it. There are more sophisticated versions that emerge spontaneously. So here's a very simplistic formula. Okay, it's called STOP, S-T-O-P.
Okay.
Okay, so S, it's an acronym. S, something bothers you, you're stuck in a traffic jam, or somebody blows their horn, or somebody criticizes you, say something nasty. Stop. S, stop. T, take 3 deep breaths.
Okay.
O, observe your body. It doesn't feel good. and keep observing it. And while you're observing it, imagine it smiling everywhere, from your toes to your heart to your this, and then proceed consciously with compassion. Okay, so S-T-O-P.
Okay.
Now, of course, if you cultivate meditation as a daily practice, you will override your reptilian brain. We have 3 brains, technically speaking. So this part is your reptilian brain, which is about 300 million years old.
Okay.
It behaves like a reptile.
Okay.
It attacks or it runs. This is our limbic brain, which is emotional. Okay, when we feel love, compassion, joy, equanimity, what in the Buddhist tradition are called the divine attitudes. This gets activated, and now we know when this gets activated, healing gets activated in the body.
Okay.
So when you're experiencing love, compassion, joy, or equanimity, your self-repair mechanisms go into action. And then this is the cortical brain. This is 300 million years old. This is 100 million years old. This is only 4 million years old. So because of this, we have art and architecture and music and civilization, as we call it. Not much of it is civilized, but we still have culture. And this is the reflective brain. So actually, in my recent books, I've started to map the neuroscience of consciousness, where you can become aware, and that's the sophisticated part, of exactly which part of your brain you're activating in any activity that you have. Okay, so, and how do we know that? Through functional MRIs. What is becoming even more important, is my new book is with the Harvard neuroscientist, is that, most neuroscientists say, your brain produces your thoughts. Say how? And they won't be able to tell you. This is called the hard problem in neuroscience. We have no idea how the brain produces consciousness, so we might be asking the wrong question. Does your brain produce consciousness, or your consciousness produce the brain? And so I asked Rudy this, my colleague, head of neuroscience at Harvard, and he said, with every thought, with every emotion, with every interaction, with every word, we change the neural networks of our brain. There's a new lingo in neural science. It's called neurons that fire together, wire together. And we now can actually, because humans are the only species that we know of that are self-aware, and we've known this through our tradition, by the way, but never scientifically, that as you change your consciousness, you change your brain. As you change your brain, you no longer look at the world the same way. Your body responds. So knowledge is different in different states of consciousness. Perception is different in different states of consciousness. Your body is different. Social interactions, relationship with the environment, they all evolve as consciousness evolves.
So you change your own reality. You create your own
Totally.
world.
We have a chapter in the book called The Reality Illusion. Okay, so you totally change. And Vedanta, of course, they say there's waking, sleeping, and dreaming. Then there's Turiya, the 4th state of consciousness. There's Turiya Tattva, which is cosmic consciousness. There's Bhagavad consciousness, divine consciousness. And there's Brahman consciousness, which is unity consciousness. Words that meant nothing to most people 30 years ago. But today we can actually map these in the brain. So I don't believe that any of the stuff you read about in the ancient wisdom tradition of Vedanta is metaphysical. It's practical, down to earth, and we can make this the new science of consciousness, which is the only science that's missing. We have physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics. But physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics are activities in consciousness. Why don't we have a science that deals with where the action is?
True, go to the root.
Go to the root.
Right. Just the thought of it is so illuminating, So Deepak ji, wanting to, ask you, this is a question that all of us brought up with saying, it's a gut feeling. Some people say, don't go by your gut feeling. Some say, go with your gut. What is this instinct?
Gut is, your gut makes the same chemicals as your brain makes. But your gut is more contextual. The brain, being rational and also influenced by the ego mind, always thinks in terms of logic. The gut feeling is contextual, relational, holistic, intuitive. It's eavesdropping on what's happening behind the scenes. So
Okay.
I would say trust your gut feelings. They don't doubt themselves.
Okay.
The brain does.
Okay. So then coming to the brain and then the intellect. Is the intellect limiting in terms of spiritual growth?
Totally. The intellect is totally, again, Sanskrit word pragyaparad. Pragyaparad, aparad, means mistake of the intellect. So the intellect comes from the fragmented mind. That's why we've created science, which is a fragmented science. You know, if science was holistic, we wouldn't have nuclear bombs. We wouldn't have genetically modified food. We wouldn't have petroleum products in our food. We wouldn't have global warming. Now, having said that, I'm here because of the gifts of science. Okay, I took a jet plane and got here, and people can watch us. So that it has a role. But science, in the absence of a holistic spiritual understanding, will destroy us. We need a science that is inclusive of consciousness, and that's the next phase of science.
What's the relationship between commerce and spirituality?
It's the only way that commerce should be propagated in the future. India should export her wisdom. You know, we are moving from the age of materialism, from the industrial age to the information age, which we're in the midst of. The information age will give rise to a knowledge-based society, and a knowledge-based society will lead to a wisdom-based society. And in the end, if it's not spiritual, then it shouldn't be part of our commerce. I would say there are 4 problems right now. Social injustice, economic disparities, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, eco-destruction, and war and terrorism. All these have their solution in a new birthing of a spiritual civilization.
And you're optimistic
based
about
in science.
it? You're optimistic about it?
I'm not. I'm realistic. I think it could go either way.
Okay.
It depends on us and our ability to achieve critical mass, tipping point.
Wanting to come back to spirituality, the dangers of the institutionalization of spirituality.
The dangers of the institutionalization of spirituality are religious fundamentalism, basically, which is rampant in the world. Fundamentalism of any sort comes about through the institutionalization of the spiritual experience. Now, what is the spiritual experience? Which is common to all. It's transcendence, going beyond the perceptual experience of space-time causality to the source. It's the emergence of Platonic truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, evolution, Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram, whatever you want to call it, truth, goodness, but also kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, peace. And the third, which is very important to all these traditions, is the loss of the fear of death, because you've touched something that's not in space-time. That's the essential experience. Then that gets camouflaged in a doctrine, and then people go to war. So that is a big danger. And slowly we've got to go beyond that, because otherwise we're in trouble. All the conflict in the world right now is in the name of God. And religions and institutions.
And religion, God, and all these things somewhere rule by fear.
Totally by fear.
And
it's the reptilian brain.
Yeah. Do you see yourself as a guru, and how open are you to others seeing you as a guru?
I don't see myself as a guru. I see myself as somebody who likes to explore consciousness. I'm very thrilled with what's happened over the last 3 years, because when I started speaking, it was instinctively, it was gut feeling as a physician, knowing something was missing. But now, thanks to science and technology, seeing validation, seeing the quantum physics emerge as a very dominant understanding of nature, that at the most fundamental levels of nature, it's invisible, it's not deterministic, it's creative. All these things that are coming from the world of science. So I see myself as collaborating with scientists who are also sages. So we have a conference once a year at my center called Sages and Scientists. Through, I've been lucky in terms of selling a lot of books and making a lot of money. So I put it all now in the non-profit, and we've created a prize which we want to compete with the Nobel Prize for the best scientific contributions to an understanding of consciousness. We've been doing it for 4 years, and we've given prizes to major scientists who are totally getting that the universe is a conscious entity, that consciousness is a fundamental activity of the universe. So that's what I consider myself. I consider myself a convener of other people in this area. And through my books I express myself, but I'm now seeking collaborations from people who know more about some of the things I've been saying instinctively. They know more technically, and so that's what I consider myself. Other people, what they think of me is their business, not mine.
What do you see as the future of healing?
I see as the future of healing very advanced technologies. Right now, for example, you see this band I'm wearing. I can tell by pressing a little button here how many calories I'm expending, how much exercise I've done, how much sleep I got, how much was dream sleep, how much was deep sleep, stress levels. These are technologies that I'm collaborating in creating.
Okay.
And I see that there will be technologies that will help you to understand yourself. I'm working with Rudy right now on something called a dream weaver. It feeds vibrations into your brain that put you to sleep or dream state without drugs. Okay? We understand. So that's one part. And the other part is spiritual. Technology for understanding. Pharmaceuticals, the more I look at pharmaceuticals, 85% of them don't work. They're optional or marginal in their benefit, and they create huge side effects. Pharmaceuticals are based on a wrong understanding of the human body. That is, your body is a noun, and that this is going to fix it. Your body is a verb. It's an activity. I can't control it with a noun. Okay, so it's wrong thinking. First of all, you pay attention to a few things: sleep, exercise, stress, relationship, diet, and understanding your body, mind, and spirit. You've covered 95% of what happens out there. Only 5% of diseases we now know, and this is all latest information, are due to genetic mutations that you inherit. But the rest of your genes are also verbs. They're activities that respond to what's happening in your body, mind, and spirit. So I see technology as giving us feedback, but I see ultimately a deeper self-awareness as the solution to all problems. That's why all these bills we have in the US on health reform, etc., they're useless. They're insurance reform bills. They have nothing to do with health. Health is, you are in charge of your health, nobody else.
I love this noun and verb thing, because it changes the complete view. I mean, from here, you brought it here to see that it's work in progress. It's in your control.
Yeah.
You don't feel helpless anymore.
There are no nouns in the universe. It's a convention of language, by the way. Even this smug at the deeper level is subatomic particles that are moving in and out of an infinite void. This is a verb, but slower than your body.
Okay. So the whole pace which is different.
The whole universe is an activity. Brahmand. It's vibrating.
Well, you really converted this place into a Brahman. Deepak, thank you so much for this, all the vibrations and the lovely knowledge that you brought in.
Thank you. It was
we
wonderful
look forward to
meeting
meeting again.
Yes, I'll be thrilled to come back.
Thank you so much. Thank you.